Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be filming for you my last book haul of 2021. So this book haul is going to contain some books that I bought way back in the summertime because I kind of limited my book buying starting in the fall. I won't say that I didn't buy any books in the last couple of months, but not as many. Most of these are coming from early August. I'm super excited to show you these. These are the last book haul that I'm going to be filming for the rest of the year. A few of them I've already read, so I'll let you know which ones I've read and really enjoyed. And without further ado, let's just get into it. So the first book that I picked up is Nature of Witches by Rachel Griffin. This I've heard is a fantastic autumnal read. This tells the story of Clara, who is an Everwitch. In this world, witches have power based on the weather, basically, and different types of nature. Clara is an Everwitch, which means she has control over all aspects of weather, and can control her magic in every season because your magic is inextricably tied to the season that you are kind of associated with. I believe this follows her over the course of an entire year and helps her to deal with the effects of climate change and all of the things that she can do as an Everwitch to help. I've heard it's a great story. It's got some romance in it. It's a great little transitional story from autumn or late summer into autumn into winter. So I'm very excited to read this very soon. Next up, I picked up Wondersmith and Hollowpox by Jessica Townsend. These are the two sequel books in the Trials of Morrigan Crow series. This series follows Morrigan Crow, who is a cursed child. Everything that happens to her in her town is blamed on her, and she's fated to die on her 11th birthday. This follows her as she is kind of whisked away from her town and entered into the trials for the Wonder Society in a weird town she's never been to called Nevermore. She is chosen by a patron named Jupiter North, a member of the Wonder Society, to compete in these trials over the course of a year and to become a member of the Wonder Society at the end. If she doesn't make it through the trials, then she will be sent back where she comes from and most certainly will die. This is such a great middle grade series. I absolutely adore it. I am partway through Wondersmith right now. It's one of the books that I'm currently reading. And I'm really loving it. You can fly through these really fast, again, because they're middle grade, but they're super complex. They have great family dynamics, great found family dynamics, great friendships, and a really interesting storyline, so I highly recommend them. I can't wait to finish off this series. This is the entire trilogy, I believe, and it's going to be a really good time. Next, I picked up the graphic novel Mooncakes by Wendy Zhu, Suzanne Walker, and Joe Gill. This is a Halloween spooky but whimsical graphic novel following two main characters. Teen witch Nova, who is deaf and a aspiring witch. She lives with her two grandmothers and is attempting to learn everything she can about witchcraft. It also follows Tam, who's a non-binary werewolf, and Tam and Nova end up rekindling their part of a spark that comes from when they knew each other in childhood. It's adorable. The art style is absolutely stunning. I adore it so much. I read this in October and I really loved it. I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I want more, basically. It's really cozy, it's really whimsical, it's very heartwarming, and I highly recommend it to anybody who's interested in a kind of spooky but heartwarming Halloween read. Next up, I picked up The Tower of Nero by Rick Riordan. This is the 5th and final book in the Trials of Apollo series, and also the final book so far in the Percy Jackson universe, I guess I could say. The Trials of Apollo follows our main character Apollo, who in the last 2 series from the Percy Jackson world kind of messed up. And as punishment, Zeus ends up banishing him down to Earth, which has happened many times, but this time he sends him in the body of a 16-year-old boy named Lester, who's going through puberty, who has no magic, and he has no ability to kind of bring himself back to Olympus. He ends up having to work with another young demigod named Meg, who is a daughter of Demeter, to restore all of Apollo's oracles across the world. He has 5 main oracles, and all of them are failing because of his actions in the earlier series. I'm super excited to read this. This is the last book in the series, so I'm kind of putting it off, but I adore this series with all my heart. It's got all of the magic from Percy Jackson with a really fun and very well developed character of Apollo. It's interesting seeing this from the point of view of one of the gods, especially as he has to come to terms with learning about humanity and what it means to be human, because he's never known. And it's a really fun, interesting story. It's got all their favorite characters from the previous 2 series, as well as some really great new characters. A really great storyline, a great set of villains, and I am so excited to read this very soon, hopefully. Yeah, I adore this so much, so I'm really sad that it's gonna be over, but it's gonna be a good, great final read. I just know it. Next up, I picked up The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reid. This is a adult fantasy novel inspired by Hungarian folklore and Jewish mythology. This tells the story of Evike, who is says here, it follows a young pagan woman with hidden powers and a one-eyed captain of the woodsmen as they form an unlikely alliance to thwart a tyrant. That is all I really know about it. I've heard amazing things about this, especially from people who are lovers of high fantasy and fairy tale folklore inspired stories. I'm really interested to see where the Hungarian history comes into it and to learn more about some Jewish folklore, because I don't really know a lot right now. And I'm very excited to read this very soon. Again, it sounds very autumnal. I've heard it's fantastic, and as soon as I am in the mood for an adult fantasy, I will be going for this. Next up, I picked up Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. This is the first volume of a brilliant gay graphic novel series following our 2 characters. I believe their names are Nick and Charlie. Yes. So it says, shy and soft-hearted Charlie sits next to rugby player Nick Nelson in class one morning. A warm and intimate friendship follows, and that soon develops into something more for Charlie, who doesn't think he has a chance. But Nick is struggling with feelings of his own, and the 2 grow closer and take on the ups and downs of high school. They come to understand the surprising and delightful ways in which love works. I've heard amazing things about this series. There's I think 4 volumes out right now. And again, the art style is so pretty. I love the light blue and the simple style, but it's just absolutely stunning. And I'm very excited to get to this. I think it's going to be very heartwarming, and I am very excited to finally dive into this very well and beloved series. Next up, I picked up this stunning edition of The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. This is another, I think it's technically a middle grade fantasy. This is a kind of dark and twisty middle grade novel following our main character, who lives in a kind of the countryside in England. And follows him as he recounts the story from his childhood of running from a evil kind of creature that has inhabited his not housekeeper but kind of nanny, Ursula, and he ends up meeting these 3 characters that live in the house next door that are actually are beings from folklore who are sent to protect from this evil creature. And it's a very interesting and very whimsical story. I really enjoyed listening to the audiobook. I ended up giving it a 3.5 out of 5 stars just because I kind of got a little lost along the way a few moments, but I think that will come with time and rereading it. I ended up picking up this illustrated edition, which is absolutely stunning. The illustrations in it are just gorgeous. And I can't wait to peruse through this because, again, I listened to the audiobook when I first read it. But I'm really excited to get to this again. I love Neil Gaiman's writing, and this one was just as eerie as Coraline, but I think I preferred Coraline overall. But again, this is kind of a classic, and I am excited to leaf through this edition that I've purchased. Next up, I picked up The Ex-Hex by Erin Sterling. This was the first book I read in October, and it was probably my favorite book I read in October. This is a adult romance following our main character, Vivi, who lives in the town of Gravesglen, Georgia, which is a kind of magical town. When she was 19, she ended up on this whirlwind romance with a man named Reese, who is a part of the kind of founding family of this town, who lives in Wales. But he ends up breaking her heart, and after a hot bath, a lot of vodka, her and her cousin end up trying to put on a hex on him. Seems like it doesn't work, but then 9 years later, Reese has to come back to this town to kind of recharge the ley lines that provide magic to the town as a member of the founding family. And the 2 of them meet again, and all of a sudden his luck changes, and it seems like the hex may have actually taken and actually may have cursed him. This was such a fun read. It was really funny. I loved the kind of mix of Halloween Town and like Stars Hollow, Mystic Falls kind of feeling that the setting gave me. I loved all the characters. I loved Vivi. I loved her sister Gwen. I loved her Aunt Elaine. I loved Reese. I loved every character in this story. And I think it's a one that I would highly recommend to anybody who wants to read a kind of Halloween-y, witchy, fun time. This was really good time and I really enjoyed it, so highly recommend. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. Next up, I picked up the second volume of Snot Girl. This one's called California Screaming by Brian Lee O'Malley and Leslie Hung. This is a graphic novel series following our main character Lottie, who is a social media influencer who's been wrapped up in a kind of murder mystery kind of story. I read the first volume of this. It was the first book I read this year, actually. And again, I love the art style. It's very colorful, it's very bright. And I think the story was just really interesting. Seeing a story centering around like an influencer and their kind of world and their lifestyle was really interesting, and then adding in the kind of murder mystery element really drove the plot forward. And I'm very excited to continue it. I'm planning on reading this actually this month, so very excited for that. Next up, I picked up Vespertine by Margaret Rogerson. This is one of my most anticipated books of the entire year of 2021. I love Margaret Rogerson's standalone fantasy novels. They're two of my favorites, are her previous works, Enchantment of Ravens and Sorcerer of Thorns. This one follows our main character, what's her name? Artemisia, who's training to be a Grey Sister, which is a nun that cleans the bodies of the dead in order to protect their secrets and stop them from rising forward again as spirits. But one day her convent is attacked by possessed soldiers and she ends up having to wield and awaken the spirit that lives in a relic in order to save her convent. However, this spirit is a revenant. It is a malevolent spirit who threatens to possess her the second she drops her guard. But this world seems to be under attack, and so she has to take on the role of a Vespertine, which is a nun that is trained as a priestess in order to wield a sacred relic. However, the world and knowledge of the Vespertines have been lost to time, so she ends up having to turn to the Revenant in order to understand it and learn how to wield it properly. I'm super excited about this. I've heard amazing things. I love Margaret Rogerson's work, so I think this is going to be a super great read, again, once I feel more in the mood for a fantasy. Again, it's a fantasy standalone, so it's not too much to sign up for, so I think it's going to be a really good time. And also, how stunning is this cover? Like, absolutely gorgeous. I can't wait to read this. Next up, I picked up kind of on a whim, Payback's a Witch by Lana Harper, and this turned out to be my favorite book of October. This tells the story of Emmy Harlow, who is a witch and part of the founding family of this town in the southern United States. Her ancestor is known as the arbiter of these games that are put on every generation or so, called the Gauntlet. It is how the magical town kind of decides between its 4 founders who is going to be the kind of like magical mayor of the town and deal with the magical element of everything that goes on in this town. For years and years and years, the Blackmore family has won the Gauntlet. It's kind of become a written tradition. And Emmy ends up being called back to this town after being gone for nearly 9 years in order to fulfill the role of arbiter as passed down by her father. So she's kind of the game master almost of these trials, and she is the kind of impartial judge and the kind of record keeper of this town. She had her heart broken by the scion of the Blackmore family, and that is the reason she ended up leaving the town. She comes back home and finds out that this Blackmore heir not only hurt her, but ended up hurting her best friend, who is the one of the children of another founding family, the Thorns, and another daughter of a founding family, Talia, who's the daughter of the Aramonts. And the 3 girls end up teaming up in order to stop them from winning the Gauntlet again. And along the way, Emmy and Talia end up having sparks fly. This like very much reminded me of John Tucker Must Die, but at the end 2 of the girls end up getting together, which I think is the only way you can improve John Tucker Must Die. I really loved this. I ended up binge reading it. I think I read it all in one go, if not the first like 20 pages and then the rest of it in one go. I absolutely adored this. I think it was super fun. I think it was really heartwarming. I loved the friendships, I loved the romance, and I loved the magical element of the town. I just overall really enjoyed this. I think anybody who wants to read a kind of queer, sapphic, witchy rom-com, Highly, highly recommend. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars if you couldn't tell. Next up, I found this in Stratford when I went for a visit back in the end of or mid-October. This one really caught my eye because for my MA, I ended up taking a class on medieval romances, and we read a story called Silence, which is an anonymous romance about a character who is born as a girl but raised as a boy in order to claim her inheritance from the king's most, as the daughter of the king's most trusted knight. And it's a really interesting case of medieval like gender, because again the ideas of like non-binary people or gender identity didn't really exist back then, so you can't really take modern conceptions of gender and apply them because they're so socially charged. But this was a really interesting case of talking about knighthood and chivalry and what it takes to be a chivalric knight despite not being a man, because Silence, which is the character's name, goes back and forth between pronouns and is really not really conflicted in her identity. She just knows herself to be the greatest knight in this town or in this world, and they embody all the ideals of a proper knight. And it was such an interesting read and a really great conversation that we had. So this is why I picked this up, because this is a modern retelling of Silence. It is called The Story of Silence by Alex Myers. I've never seen this rewritten in my entire life. I've never seen this referenced anywhere outside of this class. So I am very excited to see how this is going to go. It is just a modern retelling, so I'm interested to see how they're going to play the social aspect, because the tagline on the front is the tale of a non-binary knight finding the courage to be who they are, and non-binaryism didn't exist back then, so I'm very interested to see how this is going to be portrayed. I absolutely can't wait to read this. This is going to be so interesting, and if I like it, I'm going to send it to every one of my friends that I had in this class, because I think everybody would find this really interesting. If you just enjoy medieval stories of knighthood and quests and all that fun jazz, I think you'll like it. I think you'll like the source material, so I find that you probably will enjoy the retelling. And I'm so curious to find out what this is going to be about. I can't wait to read this. It's going to be probably the most interesting book that I picked out this year, and probably the most surprising. Also on that trip to Stratford, I ended up picking up The Daughters of Sparta by Claire Haywood. This is a retelling of the Trojan War, following the main characters Helen and Clytemnestra, who kind of get brushed under the rug a little bit in the original story of the Iliad. The tagline says, "For millennia, men have told the legend of the woman whose face launched 1,000 ships, Helen of Troy. But now it's time to hear her side of the story. Daughters of Sparta is a tale of secrets, love, and tragedy from the women behind mythology's most devastating war, the infamous Helen and her sister Clytemnestra. A vivid and illuminating retelling of the siege of Troy, told through the perspectives of two women whose voices have been ignored for far too long." This cover is stunning. I think this might be the British cover, but I'm very excited to read this. I've heard fantastic things about it. I've seen it on Twitter, like all over the place. But I love Greek myth retellings, especially ones written by women and about the women of Greek myth. And I think it's going to be a really good time. It's going to be devastating probably, but I think it's going to be a really interesting read. Next up, I picked up All's Well by Mona Awad. This is the newest release from the author of Bunny, which is a horror novel that's kind of gotten like a cult classic status recently. I've not read it. This is my first Mona Awad book, but this tells the story of our main character, what's her name, Miranda, who has chronic pain and is described as a walking nightmare. She is kind of down on her luck and is about to lose her position as a college's theater director. She's determined to put on a production of All's Well that ends well, but her group is determined to put on a story of Macbeth. Then three mysterious kind of benefactors kind of give her a prediction for her future, in which her play goes off without a hitch. She continues to keep her job, and her chronic pain is not only acknowledged but goes away. It kind of takes a weird twist. I've heard this is a very contradictory book, and I've heard that it kind of switches genres quite a bit along the way, and it kind of is hard to pin down what genre it is, which I think is going to be really interesting to read. I really love stories about Shakespeare and productions and theater, and I think it's going to be a really interesting and dark story. I'm excited to see how the chronic pain representation is in this, and I'm excited to see what the twist is going to be. I think it's going to be fascinating, and I've heard nothing but good things about Mona Awad's writing, so I'm very excited to read this, probably in early 2022. Next up, I picked up Well Matched by Jen DeLuca. This is the third book in the Well Met series, which follows our main characters in Willow Springs and the Renaissance fair that they put on every summer. This tells the story of April, who's the older sister of Emily from the first book, Well Met. She has a 18-year-old daughter who's about to go off to college, and she's very excited to finally put her life back on from when she put it on hold when she had her daughter at a very young age. She moved to Willow Springs in order to give her family this to give her daughter this fantastic childhood growing up in a small town, but she's been desperate to leave ever since she got there. She's planning on selling her house, moving away to DC, which is the closest large town, as soon as her daughter goes away to school. Dealing with her daughter about to go away to school and her participating in her last Ren Fair and preparing for that, April ends up being propositioned by Mitch, who is the town's sports coach and PE teacher at the local high school, working with the main male character Simon from the first book. He is also a huge proponent of the Ren Fair. He's always part of it, and he's been part of it since he was in high school. One day, Mitch meets up with April at a bar and asks her to be his fake girlfriend. He needs her to come to a family dinner in order to avoid the judgment of his family. And she agrees in order for him to help her renovate her house and get it ready to go up for sale. However, after the events of the fake dating incident, the Ren Fair begins and his family shows up, and this fake dating thing has to get prolonged and prolonged and prolonged, and all of a sudden she's not quite sure what's going on with her and Mitch's relationship. I'm super excited to finally have read this. I read this back in the beginning of November, and I absolutely adored it. It was fantastic. I love every book in this series. This is the third book. The first one was Well Met, second one Well Played, and this is the final one, Well Matched. I don't know if it's the final one. I shouldn't say final. I hope it's not the final. I love this writing. I love the setting of Willow Creek and the Renaissance Fair atmosphere. It's just so fun and endearing and a really great time. These books are funny. These characters are really heartwarming, and I just highly recommend this entire series to everybody who hasn't read it yet. They're some of the best adult romance books I've read. It's one of my favorite series of all time. And this one was no different. It was absolutely stunning. If you can't tell, I also gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. And finally, I am part of a virtual book group, book club, that meets on Zoom, and we read a mixture of fiction and nonfiction books every month. This month we actually decided to do a book exchange, and I was gifted this book by a great friend from this book club, which was super exciting. And this was Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. This is another Greek myth retelling, one that actually was on my top 21 books of 2021, and I haven't read it yet, and I didn't have it for myself, so this was the perfect pick for me. The description goes, Ariadne, princess of Crete, grows up greeting the dawn from her beautiful dancing floor and listening to her nursemaid's stories of gods and heroes. But beneath her golden palace echo the ever-present hoofbeats of her brother the Minotaur, a monster who demands a blood sacrifice. When Theseus, the prince of Athens, arrives to vanquish the beast, Ariadne sees in his green eyes not a threat but an escape. Defying the gods, betraying her family and country, and risking everything for love, Ariadne helps Theseus kill the Minotaur. But will Ariadne's decision ensure her happy ending? And what of Phaedra, the beloved younger sister she leaves behind? Hypnotic, propulsive, and utterly transporting, Jennifer Saint's Ariadne forges a new epic, one that puts the forgotten women of Greek mythology back at the heart of the story as they strive for a better world. Again, Greek myth retelling, focusing on the women of the story that are usually brushed to the side, written by another woman, and I cannot wait to read this. The story of the Minotaur and Theseus is one of my favorites from Greek myth, and the story of the labyrinth. So I'm very excited to see it retold from Ariadne's point of view. I think it's going to be a really fun time. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this haul. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of the books that I just mentioned or if any are on your TBR for the next couple months. If you're new here, please subscribe. I put out new bookish and writing videos every week, and I hope you guys have a lovely day. Bye-bye.